for you. You're figuring your shit out. That's great. I'm really, really happy for you. But I'm tired.
Nothing matters. Not anymore. It's sad that it seems like this feeling is becoming increasingly common, or maybe people are just becoming more vocal about this kind of sentiment in recent memory. It is certainly reflected in our art, and who could argue that that feeling isn't becoming more widespread, as the most awarded film of all time explores nihilism as a central theme. Having won 266 awards out of 405 nominations, we simply do not have enough time to go through every single one. Instead, we will discuss what is likely the most prestigious of them all, the Oscars. At the 95th Academy Awards, Everything Everywhere All at Once won 7 out of 11 nominations. Best Director, Best Picture, Best Original Screenplay, Best Film Editing, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, and Best Supporting Actress. An absolutely monumental achievement, not to mention that Michelle Yeoh also became the first Southeast Asian actress to not only be nominated for Best Actress, but also take home the award. She's also the second person of color ever to win this award. So why bring any of this up? After all, the title of this video is about how Everything Everywhere All at Once portrays nihilism, and yet I haven't even begun discussing one of the film's central themes.
We're just going around in circles.
Well, like everything else in this world, context is important, and I feel it is necessary to explore how we even got here. Not here, but here. Look at this poster. Look at this trailer. My very first exposure to this film was through the previews from my viewing of The Eternals, an awful movie, might I add. I was seeing it with my friends, and our very first comment was our surprise at Michelle Yeoh, an older Asian woman, playing the lead role for what looked like a fast-paced, action-packed multiverse spectacle. Now, when you hear these descriptors, this is probably what comes to mind, not this. As a Vietnamese American, that was my very first thought upon seeing this in 2022, and I haven't stopped reflecting on that since. Why is it, when I saw someone who looked like me, at least much more than these guys, I thought, this must be the side character? Why is it that even after 2018's Crazy Rich Asians, a wildly successful American movie with an entirely Asian cast, that I'm still perplexed by a movie with an Asian lead that's not a superhero or Bruce Lee? Crazy Rich Asians. An American movie with an all-Asian cast and a massive budget behind it. This was the movie of the summer of 2018. People around you would not shut up about how good it was, and if you looked like me, people would not stop telling you how you had to see it, like it was my duty as an Asian American to see this movie. So, like a good little Asian boy, I went to see Crazy Rich Asians in my first year of university, and it was a spectacle, certainly. But it didn't feel real to me. Now, please, take what I say with a grain of salt. It's a critically acclaimed film with over 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, and is one of the highest grossing rom-coms of all time. As someone who largely identifies as Apero Ace, this movie just didn't scratch any itches for me. It should come as no surprise that I'm not the biggest fan of rom-coms, especially the rom part in rom-coms. But remember, it was my duty to see this movie. Still, I think the general public would agree that the romance was just serviceable. Audiences didn't laud Crazy Rich Asians for its relatable leads and the romance between them. It is considered a monumental film in cinematic history for its representation of Asians in media. But what does that mean, exactly? Asians in general? Do you have any idea how big Asia is? When people refer to the Asian representation of this film, and unfortunately, in general, people are referring to East Asians. Everyone else, South and Southeast Asians, or rather, Asians who can't pass as East Asians, are only seen in a subservient role in this film. Now, I'm not going into a deep dive of all the criticisms I might have for this movie. I didn't forget the title of this video, I swear. But the point I'm trying to make is that in no way is Crazy Rich Asians a relatable movie. And that's fine. I don't think it was ever meant to be. However, there is a difference between intention and perception. I've no doubts that this movie intended on pushing the medium forward for representation of Asian people, but it almost feels like it was made for that sole purpose and no other.
Well, I'm one of the poorer Asians. The rainbow sheep of the family.
The author of the novel the movie is based on explicitly said that he wanted to introduce a contemporary Asia to North America. But what I think is more accurate, once again, in his own words, that he wanted to showcase the educated families with style and taste that have been quietly going on about their lives for generations, which went beyond the typical contemporary coverage of Asia. That is to say that Kevin Kwan wanted to shine a light on his experience growing up in this entire world that seems to have largely went under the radar. No, nothing about this is relatable to most of the world. The title of the novel and movie is precisely to be taken at face value. And for that reason, it doesn't say anything real. At least, not to me, an Asian who's debatably crazy and certainly not rich. Not in wealth, anyway. So why bring this up at all? This video is supposed to be about everything everywhere all at once, and all I've been talking about is Crazy Rich Asians. That's because I fully believe that the movie accomplished exactly what it intended to do, although perhaps not in the way that it thought it would. I was not personally moved by Crazy Rich Asians. I did not feel that it represented me. However, Asian actors and actresses clearly felt differently. So many wanted to be a part of the project because they knew what an opportunity this was for Asians in the industry, that audiences were interested in seeing Asians on the big screen. It opened doors that didn't seem possible before, and gave opportunities to tell real stories about us. And what is the real story that Everything Everywhere All at Once tells? The movie I described earlier of a zany, action-packed multiverse spectacle doesn't jump out as anything particularly meaningful. So how did it become the most awarded movie of all time that brought people to tears in theaters? There's a Nerd Writer 1 video I think about a lot that encapsulates this rather succinctly. That great stories are the ones that observe people truthfully and captures the human experience with nuance and insight. While Everything Everywhere All at Once is undoubtedly an entertaining movie with well-choreographed fight scenes and polished visuals, that's not what moved audiences. It was the story told by these three people that captured the human experience of the unexplainable pain that is depression and the nihilism that follows it. It doesn't shy away from the reality that these characters face a world that more often than not doesn't make sense. How despite our best efforts to understand one another, we hurt each other without meaning to.
You have to try and eat healthier. You are getting fat.
In that kind of world, what is waiting for you? Does any of it matter? No. Doesn't. That is the conclusion each of our characters reach. This is the human experience that Everything Everywhere All at Once captures that resonated with so many people, that was felt even more in a post-pandemic world. But it's not enough for the film to only recognize this about us. It became the most awarded film of all time because of what it has to say about nihilism, and that is represented by the characters' joy in Raymond. Joy comes to this realization that ultimately nothing matters, and yet she keeps experiencing pain. It saturates her existence, and when seemingly nothing matters, the answer to pain is simple. Everything hurts, and nothing matters. The void is the answer. An end to her and every single version of her that could be. I see myself in Joy. This is why I made this video over a year after the film's release. 2023 was a hard year for me. It was wrought with pain and sadness that I could not fully explain. The world seemed cruel and made less and less sense by the day. Joy looked for an end, and as did I. Evelyn, who's experiencing much of the same, listening to her daughter, begins to come to the same conclusion. But it is Raymond who offers a different answer. He too recognizes that the world doesn't make sense and that ultimately nothing matters. He has known this for a long time. And in the face of that, Raymond sees this as an opportunity to be kind. After all, in a world where nothing matters, that means that we are at liberty to choose the things that matter to us. We can be the masters of our own destiny. Even if the world doesn't make sense, even if it is very often painful, we could still be kind to each other in solidarity against a universe where nothing matters. Raymond has known this the entire film. Evelyn finally realizes who Raymond is after all this time, and realizes she has a choice to make. She could join the void and end every single possible version of herself to stop feeling this pain. Or she could look for these little moments of comfort, clarity, and love with the people around her. Raymond saved her. Raymond saved me. This is how Everything Everywhere All at Once became the most awarded film of all time. These three people who want to love each other, and Raymond in particular, this film's heart and soul. This is what resonated with so many people. To think that none of this would have been possible without Crazy Rich Asians. It paved the way for a wider representation of Asians in Western media, but it also inspired Ke Huy Quan to act again. This was his very first appearance since his last acting role 19 years prior to Everything Everywhere All at Once. There's this rhetoric that I have no doubt you've heard before. In matters of representation, there will always be a vocal few who say, why does a character have to be X? Why can't they just be white? And the simple answer is, why not? But the more nuanced answer is that that doesn't encompass the entire human experience. This movie could not have been made without Ke Huy Quan, and this particular story could not have been told any other way. Everything Everywhere All at Once saved my life. This is how the film portrays nihilism.
Nothing matters.